you can hear me, can you just put something in the chat that you can? And once I get confirmation of that, we will get rolling. And if not, Serene.
We'll be right back.
Left. Audio good. All right. Thank you for the feedback online. Appreciate it, everybody. Sean Burns can hear me, which means we can start it up. All right. Welcome back. For everybody who's been here before, presentation number 4 this year. We've done 1 a quarter, which I think is pretty awesome. Welcome back to this is a mouthful as it always is, the Mathias New York State Adult Use Cannabis Licensing Series, part 4, where we're looking back at what happened in 2022, looking ahead to 2023. We've had 3, as I mentioned, we've had 3 presentations before. We did security and staffing with our audience members, Mario Rodriguez, Lauren Lewis, Mario from Forsetti Protection, Lauren from Staff Buffalo, and Tom Hughes was also on the panel. He's joining us again today. We did real estate, zoning, and environmental. I believe it was in the spring sometime. Brad Termini from Zephyr, Ben Siegel from Wendell, Ryan, our very own Ryan Stearns, and we had Kate Ruby from Castletter Cannabis, and then it was an absolute mouthful that Mark Wallace came up with for the title, but it was basically it was SEO and digital, we'll say digital marketing in the retail cannabis era with Range Marketing. Tyler Shaw was in the audience today. We had Emily Tuttle from Spring Big, and then we had Tyler Kratky from Headset, and then I moderated everything. So if you're sick of me, maybe next year you'll get rid of me, but for right now, you're stuck with me, at least for this year. So today we are, like I said, we're diving into a look back at 2022. Was, obviously a monumental year for New York State cannabis in terms of, or New York State adult use cannabis, excuse me, in terms of the developments that have taken place, but also really it's, as we'll hear today, it's really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's to be expected in 2023. So we're going to go over some of those lessons learned in 22 in the hopes that they'll allow us to really learn about what's going to happen in 2023. Just a quick overview for everybody who isn't necessarily aware, needs a brief reminder. 2022, the biggest thing that happened was the rollout of the conditional market, right? So we don't have any permanent licenses in New York State right now. We only have conditional licenses. So in January of 2022, the state legislature passed a bill which amended the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, which you'll hear referred to as the MRTA, probably mostly by Tom, because he's going to be hammering the statutes and the regs today. But it created a new type of license that was limited to only those individuals. So it created conditional cultivation and conditional processing license. Conditional cultivation was limited to only those individuals. Like we have my friend Carrie Kimball in the audience today who had previously farmed hemp and could establish evidence of having harvest in 2 of 4 years that the hemp program was online. And then we also had the conditional processing license, Brian Lane from No Wave to my right, who, and I guess on my left online, who, it's limited to only those individuals with GMP audits, sorry, Brian, you can talk this better than I can, but in good standing with their GMP audits and holding a license in good standing to process hemp in the state. And then by regulation, we created this card license, conditional adult use retail dispensary for justice involved individuals, which are either individuals who themselves or a close relative had a cannabis conviction in New York State. We'll talk about why that's important a little bit later. And also had at least a 10% ownership in a business with net profits for 2 years or more. Very confusing, a lot going on. It caught a lot of attention this year. We'll probably talk about it later, I assume. That's the market that we're in. We had regs released at last Monday's Cannabis Control Board meeting, which will ultimately define what the permanent market is in 2023. Those regs are far from final. Tom's going to hit that a lot later. But what we want to do today is I wanted to set the groundwork for everybody before we get into our topic so we can look back with at least that framework. So let's talk about who's actually sitting next to me, because this is the most you'll hear me talk, which is actually a big thing for me because normally you can't get me to shut up. To my immediate right in person and left online, we've got Brian Lane. Brian Lane is one of the owners and compliance managers at the compliance manager at No Wave in Rochester, New York. No Wave is a CGMP certified cannabis facility, which has held a New York State hemp license since 2018 and was one of the first conditional adult use processors licensed in summer of 2022. In his current role, Brian is responsible for the CGMP certification, licensing, and regulatory requirements to keep No Wave in good standing with New York State. If you want to learn more about Brian Lane, all I would say is just follow Brian Lane's ski videos on Instagram. This guy's an accomplished triathlete, marathon runner, but we're not going to get into that because I want to keep us on time. To Brian's right, or to my Brian's right, to online's Brian's left, we have Katie Anderson from Buffalo Business First. Katie is a reporter who's been covering the cannabis industry for Buffalo Business First for a year and a half. She also covers manufacturing and the legal industry, which is probably why she's here today at a law firm. She's worked as a journalist in several markets in the last 10 years, including Northern New York, Northeast Ohio, and the greater Pittsburgh region. And if you haven't read Katie's coverage, she's been on the ground floor of everything that's happening, especially in the past year and a half. So check out Buffalo Business First and her coverage if you haven't already. And finally, last but not least, we've got Tom Hughes, co-leader of the cannabis practice team here at Lippis Mathias. Tom is a senior associate and co-leader of the cannabis practice team at Lippis Mathias. Tom has extensive experience in the firm's corporate and private equity practices and represents a diverse range of clients from startups to publicly traded companies. He is also a veteran of the U.S. Air Force and the president of the board of directors at Westside Community Services on Buffalo's West Side, where he resides with his wife and daughter. And I'm your captain, Joe Schaefer, member of Lippis Mathias Cannabis Practice Team and aspiring committee. So we've got the intro, we've got our bios. Let's dive headfirst into what the heck actually happened in 2022 and why is it important for businesses going forward. So we're going to split this presentation up into two parts. Part one, what happened in 2022 and what are our lessons. Part two, what's going on in 2023 and what do we need to be on our toes for. So what I want to talk about is the theme of the lessons learned from 2022 is the conditional market previews the permanent market. And I think it's best to start off with, somebody on our panel who's actually went through the application process, right? You need to apply for a license in order to legally operate in the market. Brian Lane went through that application process, was on the ground floor of putting the documents in. So Brian, I was hoping that you could kind of talk about what the application process even looks like from a very high level overview, and then some tips and tricks that you noticed while going through it, and then obviously being successful in licensing.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it. No Wave, like he said, has been around since 2018. We got our license in early 2019. So I actually wrote our license for the hemp program back then. Basically, our license now, the structure is not much different. It was the same asks of us. It was SOPs. It was making sure all your security plans were in place, all your background information for your company, all your financials kind of was put in place. So for us, I had my first test back in 2019, putting it all together then. We had a two-inch thick application that we submitted. I pretty much had another one the same thickness to submit for this one this year. I would say I used about 30% of that data from that application for the application this time. So my GMP and everything rolling to licensing started back in 2019. We were very fortunate the way the state rolled us out because they allowed us to kind of serve as their guinea pigs. They didn't tell us specifically that if we had a GMP certified processing center that we would get brought to the table first. We were hoping. We knew that we would have the infrastructure to be put in place first. So we made sure our foundation was strong. So we made sure our SOPs were strong. Our quality control plans were strong. That made us look in the eyes of the state. They knew we could follow compliance, which is a huge piece of this. As far as the application goes, you have everything from your security plan, your sustainability plan, your packaging plan, what your future plan is for the next 24 months, essentially, because it's the end of 2023 that a lot of these things are put in place. They actually application process was about half of it. We actually had another set of submissions to put in after we got the approval within 30 days to prove all of our processes. So every one of our product lines, I needed to submit the quality control plan for that, the SOPs for that, what equipment we had that we were using to make this equipment. And I feel bad for any processors that weren't as established as we were, because they're going to actually make up the stuff off the top of their head. They don't maybe not have the equipment in their building, or their GMP audit was based on a very small product line or just extraction, for instance. So it's a bigger picture than that. Everything falls from your financials for all of your owners, all the way down structure of the organization, SOPs, quality control checks, and then, like I said, the big nuggets, the security, sustainability, and the packaging.
Yeah,
Tom, anything there?
that's extremely detailed. The, as you'll see in the new regs, there's a little more guidance. I think you guys, thankfully you had the experience you did, Brian, because I think a lot of the conditional cultivator applicants, conditional retail applicants, conditional processor applicants were, it was a very short turnaround, very short timeline. The legislation to authorize these conditional licenses, was passed, I believe, in February of 2022. And by March 15th of 2022, they were accepting additional conditional cultivation licenses through the end of June. And then they shifted to the processing licenses through the summer, and then finally ending, I think the application period closed right at the end of September for the conditional adult use retail licenses. So it was, especially for the cultivators and the processors, and even with the retail, because that additional guidance came out later in the game, people were very reactive and didn't really have a ton of prep time to submit the best application they could. And as we'll talk about kind of in the part two, I think with the level of detail in the new regs that are out for public comment that were just published last week, there is a lot more structure and a lot more guidance for all the types and tiers of applicants. So I would advise anyone aspiring to apply, start now, because it is dense.
Yeah, nobody's heard that in that room from anybody at these microphones before. I'd start now because, I know that Brian represents one of the, processors, but even, I know a lot of cultivators filled out these applications on their own. And it's a huge task, and credit to everybody who got those licenses. But it's a lot of documentation, and especially as we understand the conditional market, it was because these folks had actually been through the legal and the regulatory and the compliance requirements through the state, through the hemp program. For folks who are just starting their businesses, there's got to be that much more that you need to prove, because no offense, but the state doesn't know you and hasn't interacted with you yet. So, we're assuming that if Brian had a 2-inch thick application, then it might be 3 inches.
Yeah, and I think worth mentioning, Brian, you can speak to this as well. For someone, it's not a carbon copy SOPs, like the state's going to audit you. They're going to be there to make sure you're doing what you said you did. So I think, you guys were lucky to go through kind of organically and have a couple of years, as you mentioned, to fine tune those. But yeah, this isn't just words on paper. They're going to be double checking.
Yeah, it's nice. We had the hemp game for that. Unfortunately, we didn't have like the finances to come into the hemp game because CBD really wasn't a big seller, right? So a lot of the things we were doing, we were hoping was going to result in the long term, right? I know a lot of farmers are in that same position, hoping that they won't have a situation that when they grow the hemp or grow the THC, that they're not going to have processors that can work with it. Like, I don't know, just to backtrack real quick, in the CBD industry, farmers came on board, us processors came on board, and the price of distillate dropped like a lead balloon. It went from thousands of dollars a kilo to we were actually making distillate for $200 more than we could sell it for. That was the reality of the CBD industry. So this certainly was a game where we were all prepping for THC coming out this year. And I just want to put another thing out there. I want to commend the OCM. And I want to commend Canny. There's two organizations really that have been behind this, to me, this provisional licensing. When this all came out, some of us thought there might be provisional, some thought there wouldn't, but just the time period he just spelled out. February to March, they were taking applications. I don't know if anybody can really think about what that meant and how incredible that was. They got it that quick. And then essentially they brought us on board as guinea pigs. Right. So us processors first ones are guinea pigs, and these first growers are guinea pigs. So they could perfect this language now that they just released last week was a lot of what they've been talking to us about over the last year or so.
Absolutely. So we spend this time, we print out our application, it's 2 pages thick. And then the next day OCM gives us our license. No. Yeah, it's not exactly. Right. So, I don't know, Brian, I think you guys were in the first round of processing, but, as Tom said, they opened up conditional cultivation applications in mid-March, and there's still some folks who are getting their cultivation licenses right now. So it's not a quick process. Let's talk about licensing. I know and all these topics are obviously going to blend, right? Because application licensing is one feeds into the next, but you know, Brian, I think it's probably makes sense to start with you and then Katie and Tom jump in as necessary, but, you know, post licensing, and Brian, you already kind of referred to it. It doesn't, the obligations of the licensee don't stop when you get the license. You don't get handed a license and then you're good to go, right? There's a little bit more to it. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I can talk about the challenges of that first off. So how about this? An organization puts out a bunch of regulations for you, then they modify them, but don't send you an email or a phone call to let you know they modified them. This actually happened with the OCM. Not that they were doing it in a bad way or trying to get a gotcha. They just didn't have the bandwidth within their own department to get it done. For instance, another processor on Long Island had a talk with Tremaine Wright, who, if any of you know, she's the head of the board, had a talk, actually a one-on-one talk after an event where he asked this of her. Hey, I love the fact that you're updating your guidances. I love the fact you're making changes on the fly, which they did for the cultivators and the dispensary and processors regs already. So we like the fact that they have these interactions, but hey, when you do update them, can you email us, right? Just give us a heads up that they've been updated. Don't give us the update, just give us the email. This is an honest response from her and I loved it. She thought for a second, didn't respond to him immediately and said, I don't know that I can get that done. And she basically thought about how the process would work in her office and said she couldn't get it done, but yet the next week it was done. So the next week, since the 7 days after that conversation was had with her, we have now gotten an email from every time an update has been made. So she actually thought about it in the moment, said, I don't know if I can get this done, but then followed up without telling everybody. And now we all get emails on updates. So I just want to put that out there that the OCM is definitely helping us with this post and then that they're working with it. So you have to actually pay attention to the website regularly to find out when they're going to update this stuff because they are doing it. For instance, I'm on the processing committee for Canny. We had a
Brian, what's Canny? Sorry.
thank you. Cannabis Association of New York, formerly the New York Growers and Processors Association. I'm on the processing committee. One Wednesday, we have a processing call. We talk with about 5 or 6 of our processors, a bullet list of about 20 points we want to give to the OCM now to make some changes on some of the terms and conditions that didn't make sense. There was some contradictory stuff in there from GMP and what they were saying there. There's a couple contradictory notes, and then the 5 milligrams per serving was in there, and then a couple other little things about the terpenes that you could use for cartridges. So we gave them bullet points, 10 bullet points. The next day, the head of our organization went and talked to the state. A week later, that terms and conditions was changed, and that's what changed it to 10 milligrams per serving, which makes us better. Why? Now it become a tourism state because we take now Massachusetts and New Jersey traffic because they only have 5 milligrams per serving. It was all based on a conversation had in our processing committee, carried over to there, and they made the changes within weeks. So I'm going to tell you right now, the OCM is doing a great job for the time they've had, for the people they have, and really listening to us guinea pigs and adhering to what we think should happen.
Doesn't that, I mean, look, it's obviously, you know, it's one thing for Brian Lane, a licensed processor, to be on, you know, an organization like Canny and submitting these comments, but it's not just limited to, you know, the high and mighty, that's not the right word, but like, you know, the guys whose voices are often heard,
It's
right?
not just an insider, you know, back channeling. There is a public comment period, which just started for the new regulations that were published last week. It was 60 days. If you go to the OCM's website, it has instructions on how to send public comments. And you know, we're encouraging all our potential applicants and current licensees to do so. And you know, if you have experience, you know, the people that are writing these regulations are not necessarily the experts that the practitioners themselves are. So, you know, if we want to get the regulations right, it's going to take input from the actual practitioners and the experts such as yourselves.
Katie, there's a long runway. I don't know if I have a good transition for you here. I don't know if you have anything to jump off of there, excuse me.
Well, when you were talking about kind of lessons learned, kind of looking back for licensees, I think there were a lot of regulatory compliance issues that people focused on, you know, some of the big items, filing all the right documentation and, you know, making sure your GMP documentation was filed, making sure your real estate was compliant. Some of those big ticket items, I think something that maybe crept up on people was security, you know, especially early on with those first cultivators. because you had folks that had been operating a well-run commercial greenhouse for years. And then you had, you know, John Doe, who had been growing tomatoes in his backyard. And he had the land, so gonna take a stab at cannabis. And I think for a lot of folks, security maybe wasn't something that they had thought about. And I think for some of those farmers that, you know, were used to people not knowing who they were, where they were, or what they were doing with their property, security became much more of a thought for them after they started getting phone calls. You know, now they're one of the first people. So I think, you know, there were some compliance issues. I think security maybe wasn't a major theme in the conditional process. And I think we'll probably seeing that change a little bit with the new regulations. But I think that's something that's probably going to change a little bit more as we get into more of the permanent licenses.
Yeah, I actually haven't been able to look at Mario to my immediate left, but I'm sure he's beaming. So yeah, your security
He didn't
providers.
pay me to say that.
I was gonna say, I don't know what there's, or said he's got kickbacks with Buffalo Business First. No. I mean, look, I think that the point's really well taken because it's something that in a lot of ways, Tom, Ryan and we've been fielding a lot of phone calls from folks because the MRTA is a law. And when it's a law, you call a lawyer. And I think, you know, one of the strengths of our group is we realize what we don't know and it's how to protect you as a, like physically, and then there's a cyber element as well. You should read Katie's piece on cybersecurity and cannabis industry with features Mario Rodriguez, but he's not a one-trick pony over there. You know, I think it's all, you know, the conditional market did was it identified quite a few blind spots and security seemed to be, you know, Katie, it sounds like that wasn't a theme for just one, you know, one of the folks that you spoke with. It's
Right.
pretty consistent, is that right?
Yeah, for sure.
Brian, Tom, I think I'm gonna come back to you guys because Katie kind of kicked it off with compliance markers. Tom, I mean, beyond security, and you know, I guess Brian kind of spoke to it in terms of like ongoing submission. So either of you guys can jump in, but Brian, maybe can you talk about that process? I think, you know, you've commended the OCM quite a bit, and I think, you know, my understanding of it is there's been some flexibility with submitting reports and whatnot. But can you talk about like the process of submitting those reports, what feedback you're getting and if any, and how that's maybe evolved over the past couple of months since you guys got licensed?
Yeah, actually, it's been mixed, to be very honest. I believe that they've definitely allowed us to create our building and we've had to be the GMP and all the paperwork we've submitted, they've already approved, which has been great. I also am looking to get some feedback on a hydrocarbon extraction process that I haven't heard back from them yet. Was hoping at least have like a formal email that said we received your request. So I would say in that regards that they're not perfect yet. But I also know that, you know, it could be till March till they do that, depending on the solvent you use. But in general, they have sent us a survey as well that really was very detailed about what product lines we planned on putting out there and by when, how many units, how much packaging, what we've purchased, what contracts we've tied into already. So they sent us a very detailed survey about where we all were as processors to then give them an idea of where we're at. But it's funny because we were all kind of waiting for a little more from them before we made a lot of these purchases. Because the last thing we want is order some packaging and then they give us another guidance on packaging. And next thing you know, we wasted $500,000 on packaging.
Well, Tim, let me stop you because I know you're gonna dive into it, but Tom, like marketing, packaging, any sort of guidance from OCM, and Brian referred to it, this is an easy thing to follow.
No, it's
No.
been,
No, it's
I mean, like almost monthly, some of these terms and conditions and guidelines have changed. And at least they're notifying you guys now. That is encouraging. But, you know, it's been interesting for us, you know, with the cannabis group, we get these updates and we're constantly, you know, checking for these updates. But for the processors that are out there, the licensees that are out there actually doing the work and aren't, you know, reading the law or checking the OCM website every day. It's been a moving target in many respects, I think, but it's come a long way. And I think, you know, that's kind of the negative side of it. The positive side is that they're listening to the licensees and they're taking additional things into consideration and making these updates and changes, which hopefully will inform a more well-defined permanent market based on the, what we've learned over the conditional period.
Yeah, and I think Brian, put it best in terms of saying that the conditional market, for better or for worse, are really they're the guinea pigs for what the permanent market will be. And I think there's been, Katie, I'm gonna come to you on this in a second. I don't know how much you're able to share, but there's been quite a bit of frustration from the general public and obviously also from the licensee side that, well, why don't we have 80 dispensaries? I want to walk down to Chippewa right now and go get an eighth and go home and enjoy my evening or enjoy my Thanksgiving break or, give edibles to all my loved ones for, for the holidays. But, in the end, I think it's the conditional market is really a way of, I think, qualifying it as this is almost like the preseason of New York State cannabis, right? Katie, I had a question in there. I forgot it when I was describing it. I got excited about a dispensary on Chippewa. Let's talk about maybe some of the, I don't know if frustrations is the right word or difficulties that you've seen. I mean, you talk to a lot of people, right? So Brian's obviously speaking from NOAA. Our team, we work with a few licensees, but I feel like you've been able to get a really nice survey of the industry across the entire supply chain and also ancillary services providers. So was hoping you kind of speak on that.
I think the general public, they do think that there are dispensaries out there and they're just going to the wrong ones apparently. But I have heard a lot of frustration even early on with some of the first cultivators that I talked to. One of their biggest concerns, even when they were submitting an application, was, will there be a ready market for them? And here we are months later, and there isn't one. So, and I think, it's validating. That's not really what they wanted, but their concerns were very valid, back months ago. I think that's still the concern for a lot of folks. And obviously we'll talk about the injunction later on. But that's been one of the frustrations, as Tom called it, kind of a moving target with a lot of the regulations changing and not being able to kind of land on where people thought they were going to land. Brian here has talked about it, about thinking he can move forward with something and then the regulations change. So I think that's been a point of frustration. And then obviously, this most recent injunction, people were ready to have dispensaries. We were ready to move forward and to have them by the end of the year. And it's looking like that might not be possible by the end of the year, at least in this region. So I think there's been a lot of frustrations leading up to the most recent one. And hopefully by 2023, we'll start to see some of those mitigate, but I don't know, we'll find out.
Can we talk about those dispensaries that you just referred to? Tom, I think this is where we might need more of a legal angle on it. Can you just give us a quick overview of what's going on and then what you expect to see with these establishments in the next, foreseeable future?
So I think, to some degree, as the result of the OCM's delay in getting this process going, a lot of people have taken advantage of the legalization of cannabis by opening these sticker shops or the full-on dispensary, clubs. You see them all over the place, and there's been very lax enforcement, and I think that's been a point of frustration for people who have been sitting on the sidelines waiting patiently for the regulations to submit their applications and do things the right way. But what we are seeing is in these latest regulations is that they're going to do their homework on who was selling what. Maybe 6 months ago, Joe, some of our clients that were operating in that gray area started getting letters from the AG's office advising them, so that they know who these people are. They're advertising on Instagram, they're advertising on social media. They're not hiding in places like that. They have storefronts. So I think unfortunately for a lot of those people who planned on maybe once the regulations came out, going above board and applying for licenses, I think based on the regulations and based on the guidance that's come out from OCM, they're going to be completely out of luck. And as far as the enforcement mechanism, the enforcement regulations also were published last week at the board meeting. And they're pretty extensive as far as the fine structure and the ability of OCM and, other agencies in New York State to enforce these regulations now that they are actually, or once they are crystallized. So it's been a little bit of the wild, wild west as far as these shops and dispensaries go, but I think OCM is very intent on cleaning that up, which from the standpoint of, the conditional licensees and the permanent license applicants is a good thing, because if you're going to spend the money, you're going to pay your taxes and you're going to take the time, energy, and make the expenditures to do this the right way. You want an even playing field. So hopefully for those folks, OCM's pretty serious about the enforcement, despite what was pretty lax for a good period of time.
And it seems to be ramping up from what we've seen in other regions. I think it's, while we may have a few here in Western New York, it seems like it's a lot more rampant down. I mean, I was in Manhattan
In the city, it's
like a
wild,
month
yeah.
ago, and I feel like every block there's a dispensary. We've seen the buses get raided, or, I think it's basically based on unpaid parking tickets, but we're starting to see actual raids and seizure of quote unquote product. And a lot of it has to do with the third-party testing requirement. I mean, the whole point of legal cannabis is, if you hear OCM, the refrain is safe, third-party tested adult use cannabis, right? There's no, I mean, unless these guys, and I can't speak from experience, and maybe I'm, speaking from a blind spot, but there's no testing requirements on, yeah, right? There's no testing requirements. It is the Wild West. And, I think what OCM has been very clear about from, the second Cannabis Control Board meeting last October was sticker shops are not legal and they won't be. And then they sent cease and desist letters last February, and then they came out again and said, these aren't allowed and there will be severe, you're not going to get a license, there's going to be civil penalties and there's potential criminal penalties.
And this goes for any true party of interest. So even if someone is coming in to finance a cannabis grow operation or to manage a licensee, you read the regulations on true party of interest, it's pretty expansive. They're going to be denied applications. So pay attention for anyone who's applying for a license as to who you're doing business with or who you're putting on your application, to make sure that they don't, they weren't receiving letters from the AG's office, or they're not on that radar, because that can disqualify you immediately.
Last question on 2022. And by the way, for my folks in person, we'll do question and answer, 10 minutes or so at the end. We started at 3:05, so we'll end around 4:05-ish. I know Brian could stand up here and go till about 7 o'clock, but I think he at least wants to check the score of the soccer game. Again, sorry, everybody. We scheduled this presentation before the World Cup scheduled their game, so that's not, you can't blame us for it. And it's hard to get Brian late in Buffalo, so we had to stick with it. Let's talk a little bit about, because, lawyers, we have to talk about ourselves a little bit, right, Tom? Ancillary services providers and people who are not necessarily going to be the licensees, but I think of, and Katie, perfectly talked about it before, your security providers, your staffing groups, your outsourced HR. Rachel, I know I hopefully I described that okay. My insurance guys in the back of the room, right? So Katie, you had some actually really cool stories this year on, we can talk about our professional service. And Michelle, I'm sorry. Hello, my fault. Compliance. No, well, lawyers, and you could be number 2 though.
Close.
Katie had some really cool, we'll talk about us boring guys in a second, but Katie, there's some kind of pretty cool stories that you ran into this year on folks who are currently on the outside looking in, I think is the best way to describe it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think in the cannabis industry, we tend to have like tunnel vision and only think in terms of like plan and the licenses that are here. But there's a lot of outside industries that are kind of watching this rollout and seeing dollar signs like the rest of us, right? There's manufacturing companies that are eyeing the industry. There's one interview that I did with Shooty Hammer Mill. They make size reduction machines. So local company, they just started a new division to make grinding machines for the cannabis industry. Another company that I talked to recently, they are a distributor of PPE equipment for the medical industry. they just launched a new division to supply the cannabis industry with gloves, hairnets, things like that. So everybody's kind of watching this industry, and while they may be targeting clients outside of the state right now, they're local here and they want to do business with companies here. So it's everybody's kind of preparing for that, and it's far more reaching than, you know, just, you know, necessarily the ancillary services, the law firms or the consultants. It's a much more broad than that. So.
Well, interesting point, Tom. I'll come to you on the other service providers as, you know, the voice of the professional service
Yes.
providers in the room. And by the way, I forgot range. Sorry, guys. We already got one shout out. So you know, it goes back to the presentation that, you know, Ryan was on about. Katie, you mentioned something about people wanting to do business in the industry in Western New York. And I vividly recall, and Ryan continues to remind this of me when we meet with folks, or, you know, where should I locate? What should I do? Buffalo's open for business. Brad said that, I think, like 10 times, right? And I think that there's a lot of opportunity when we're going to conferences, we're talking to folks, and I think there's a lot of folks who think that the cannabis industry in New York is just meant for the 5 boroughs in Long Island and, you know, the surrounding communities. And sure, New York can do what it always does. We love New York City and we appreciate it as a part of our state, but I think there's ample opportunity in Western New York you see these folks ramping up. And it's not just, we have our licensees and they're putting in the work, whether they're conditional or aiming for the permanent market. We've spoken to a lot of folks, but I think there's going to be a lot of ancillary services providers in Buffalo, in Rochester, in Syracuse, in the non-island area. No offense, everybody down there. We're not taking shots. Go Bills though. That you're going to have the support that you need if you want local businesses to support your operations. And I think we need more and more folks every day. I had a great call with Rachel last week, 2 weeks ago, before the holiday, right? So we're ramping up around here, Tom.
Agreed. I mean, you said you may meet with more than anyone, but, you know, really for a year now or more, we've been interfacing with accounting firms that are looking to get into cannabis, advising clients, and, you know, insurance agencies, which is getting more and more real all the time, because all these companies are going to need insurance, and there's all hoops to jump through, and there's a lot of established insurance agencies that see this as just a risk that they're not willing to take. But we're starting to, through a lot of the conversations we've had locally here with some larger agencies, they're really starting to look to dip their toe in that, and, you know, as things have started to crystallize. So I think there's been a lot of preparation and a lot of waiting, but now that things are really coming to fruition, I think you're going to see a lot more people, as Joe said, in these metropolitan areas, Rochester, Syracuse, Buffalo, large established companies that are going to start to work with cannabis companies as well.
I mean, you know, insurance is getting after it when my 2 uncles' best friends are getting their insurance company to dive in. So, I mean, it was pretty wild to get a call from my Uncle Buzzy and my Uncle Brian to see, you know, they wanted to talk about stuff. So
There you go.
they're calling me, right? So anyways, Brian, if you could wrap 2022 up in, you know, to talk about like not asking for a state of the cannabis industry is strong, but, you know, your take on what happened in 2022, and this will be kind of our transition point to talk about 2023 or what's to come in 2023.
First of all, it's a great thing for New York State residents. Number 2, we got a plant that's healthy for our bodies. That's out there for us now, that we don't have to worry about going to a park. You can indulge anywhere, pay attention, teach kids under 21 the right way to use it. But in general, the plant is in our hands. So I'm always going to default to that first as a longtime user. Secondly, the medical, I believe, ROs took a little hit with this license and new regulations. I don't think they're given a pathway necessarily to steal our thunder. I think that's phenomenal. I don't know if Cuomo was still in office, that would be the case. So I'm extremely happy with the way 2022 went politically in this state. I was a journalist in the state for 13 years. I paid attention to the cycle. I actually met Cuomo back when he was urban chairman back in 1996. So I've known this whole cycle. So to see it finally break and shatter and the cannabis industry comes up out of it, I'm an extremely happy man. And I love being a guinea pig in the cannabis industry, to be very honest. I've met 7 of the top 10 people in the OCM. I think Nikki's maybe met all 10 of them. But I don't see any negativity going on from those people. They're not trying to steal from us. They're not trying to manipulate. They're not trying to bring old money into this game. They are trying to reward New Yorkers. And for that, I am very happy about 2022 in the cannabis industry in New York.
Katie.
Well, I think there's still a lot to come, but you know, like Brian said, this is really, you know, this is the guinea pig stage. There's a lot of kinks to work out. And I think, you know, it's going to be exciting to see what the permanent licenses look like. I think the state has come out very strong with wanting social equity to prevail in this industry. I think that's probably been one of the most rewarding things to report on as a journalist, to see a state that really wants this aspect of the industry to thrive. And, you know, I certainly hope that will continue on through the permanent licenses.
Yeah, I think on that point, just super briefly, it's a great point. You know, the state wrote social equity into the MRTA. We've seen a lot of other states talk about social equity and absolutely fail in terms of putting it into practice. And, you know, for better or for worse, we'll talk about those card licenses in a second and that injunction. But, you know, if card isn't a commitment to social equity and what the state intends to do for its, you know, social equity applicants, I don't know what is. And I think that it's going to continue to be a part of the business. One of the best pieces of advice I got from the beginning is if you look at the MRTA as anything other than a social equity bill, you're completely mistaken. It doesn't matter if you're a social equity applicant or a non-social equity applicant. If you're a non-social equity applicant, the strongest applications from what we can tell based on reading the regs and reading the law is that you want to have a social equity piece of your business, whether that's in hiring and sourcing, in ancillary services providers. Put social equity into what you do, and the state's going to look upon you very favorably. And I think you're going to be really successful because it's a critical element to this industry, not just in our state, but across the country in the different legal markets. But, you know, Mario and I had a lot of really good conversations when we were at MJ BizCon about the opportunity, you know, to do good in social equity in New York and the platform that's in front of us. And by the way, this is a plug. One of our goal, once there's more social equity, you know, guidance out there, especially for the permanent market. And yes, I still need to read through all 280 pages. Brian's, you know, I think got us all beat right now, but our goal is to have one of these presentations be a social equity summit. I work with our marketing team, Serena, in the back. We're going to get that going. Hopefully we do it in a little bit bigger venue, have some big time speakers. We've got some really cool people on deck for that. So stay tuned. It's probably not going to be in the first couple of months. We want a little bit more guidance from the state, but you know, it's a big focus for us here and for all of our clients. We try to impose it on. Tom. Good.
Progress.
Let's talk
Progress in 2022. They made some progress. It was a long time coming, but they're taking the social equity component very seriously, and it is the centerpiece of the regs. If you look through the new regulations, it wasn't aspirational. I think they're really going to try to put it into practice.
That's a great point. All right, Tom, this is the boring part. You got to talk about regs. We're talking, all right, part one's over. We'll make part two hopefully quicker. If anybody on the chat or in the audience can give me an update on the score of the game, I'd appreciate it.
1-0.
1-0. Good. Okay,
Thank
let's
you.
keep it that way. Brian's literally his feet a bit. Yeah, that's why he's tapping his feet up. Okay. We're gonna do about 10 minutes on this. We'll do Q&A after that, and we'll get everybody to the appetizers and the wine, beer, soft drinks, etc. Okay, 2023. We had probably the biggest meeting of the Cannabis Control Board to date last Monday, November 21st, because what happened? We got the first draft of the regs for the permanent market. Anybody who's talked to me or Tom or Ryan over the past 24 months or Christian, we've all said the same thing to all of you. We'll have to wait till the regs come out. We can guess, we can assume what's going to happen, but we have to wait for the regs to come out. Hey, sorry, it's probably going to be in the regs. Our paralegal Rachel's laughing at me because I think she's heard me say it more than anybody because she's in all of these conversations. Well, guess what? We got more conditional cultivation licenses. We got more processing licenses. We got 36 conditional adult use retail dispensary licenses, which we're going to talk about in a second. But we got the regs. Tom, licenses are opening tomorrow, applications tomorrow.
That would be ideal.
That would be ideal.
But there's a process.
There's a process.
So as I had mentioned before, they're open for public comments. And again, encourage everyone who knows something about these regs or is impacted by these regulations to read them. It's a little bit painful, I can attest, but it is worth it because they are, I was very impressed based upon the level of detail and the specificity and clarity in the regs. Does not mean they're perfect. And I think that you could probably talk to someone else who may disagree with my initial reaction to them. But I think having waited for them for so long, now I think really the answers to most of those questions are in there. Will that be the final regulations? We'll see. There's 60 days to do it. Then they'll kind of take the comments, process them, make revisions to the regulations, publish them again for another shorter public comment period. Realistically, Joe and I were spitballing. We're looking probably beginning of Q2 by the time these are finalized. And based on the conditional process that we saw occur and unfold in 2022, I mean, that could mean regulations are finalized, license applications open the next month, next week. So you know, we're talking months now, and there's going to be specific deadlines and progress. It's no longer just some time out in the future when the regs come out. So that is encouraging, and I do encourage people to read through them. If there's detailed, you know, almost checklists for the applications and the documentation you're gonna need. A lot of, you know, this justice involved component where people have to prove their prior convictions. I don't know about you guys, but I don't have all my old arrest paperwork just sitting around. You know, you might have to call the courthouse or something like that. So, you know, there's things with lead time potentially. So people that are looking to apply, don't wait for these regs to be finalized before you start making those phone calls and assembling these things, because I think that 3 inches may be an understatement.
So.
We'll leave that one right where it is. Good, right? I've been hanging out with Tom, so. Lost my train of thought. It was too good. All right. So, Tom, last question on that. And we don't know the answer to this, so Tom doesn't know the answer, because nobody's answered it, but like, we have, was it 7 types of license? They didn't release all of the different license types,
Correct.
right? What wasn't released?
We've got the on-site consumption and the delivery license regulations that are still forthcoming. So hopefully before the end of the year, we'll get some guidance on those, but we've got the cultivation and all the different tiers and additional clarification on what that's going to entail, processing, distribution, and the retail licenses as well.
Sure. And right now, we also don't know, Tom and I were talking about this before, they could roll out cultivation, processing, distro, micro, nursery,
Yep.
retail all at once, or they could say, hey, we need more cultivators and do cultivation, processing, distro in a wave. We just don't know what that's gonna be. We can't blame it on the regs not being out. We can just blame it on LCM not giving us any additional
For
guidance.
sure. And I would, you know, we saw the rolling applications for the conditional market. I would anticipate everything opening at once. You know, don't assume if you're going to be applying for a retail license or a processing license that you've got additional time. Because like I said, we just don't know. And I would, if I had to guess, which I don't, but I will anyways, I think they're going to be inclined to open everything at once. We've already got an established market out there. So
We're probably
Just
gonna need
hoping.
more dispensaries too.
yeah,
Brian, how do permanent regulations affect you as a current conditional licensee? Or you can answer a different question if you don't like that one.
No, that's fine. I don't think it impacts us much, just because we're a little further ahead of the game than most processors. We thought about buying our equipment before 280E hit, so we have most of our equipment purchased in our building, so we don't have to deal with that issue. So we thought about the little things going into it, knowing full well we didn't want to play games financially later on. So as far as the actual regs, it looks very favorable to us. We follow the rules.
we're GMP compliant for 4 years now. I've scored over 94 all 4 years on my audits. So I believe everything, our company's done everything to fall in line. Now it's just making sure we follow the rules and regs as we go forward. I do like the clarity, and I hope that Tom's right. I hope they are gonna roll everything out at once, because that was a challenge this year. Not having the processors and cultivators. I just want to put this out there for everybody who's listening. We need to have both of those licenses given together. Why? This year, we didn't have processors and growers talking to each other, and we had a lot of things going on in the farms that wouldn't have if we had those discussions. I don't know if it's anybody's fault. They ran hard into this industry to get it out this year, so I won't blame anybody, but in the future, processors and cultivators have to have discussions before seeds go on the ground to talk about lot sizes and to talk about strains and to talk about, now that we have a year under our belts, knowing what grows and what doesn't grow in this environment. That's going to be huge. So I pray they all roll out together, because we need to have those conversations before the seeds go on the ground.
We'll get Brian's contact information, any cultivators who want to talk.
Please.
Katie, permanent regs, what do you foresee coming out of this? Your thoughts on what the regs did, or any recent developments on what's going to happen in 2023.
Well, I'm excited because we're gonna see a lot more people get into the industry, right? So folks who were waiting, who maybe didn't want a conditional license, or, were just kind of watching the guinea pigs, maybe didn't want to be a guinea pig like Brian here. We'll start to see a lot more players. I think we'll probably see more small businesses, but we'll also see more MSOs. And I think it's going to be interesting to kind of see how that develops. But I think we're obviously going to have a lot more people in cannabis than we've seen so far, which is exciting for me because I get to meet more people, right? It's going to be interesting to see how the social equity aspect plays out once we start to see maybe more big players show up.
Yeah, and Katie, you touched on this. I think everybody's touched on it a little bit, but we talked about it's going to take probably, I think the estimate was 3 years for registered organizations to be able to open up dispensaries. Brian said it. Brian mentioned that it seems to be the state seems to be protecting small businesses. And Katie, I got to believe that a lot of your stories are. I know you've spoken to a number of folks across levels of the industry, but it seems like there's quite a few small businesses who seem poised to be successful, and aren't going to be booted out the way we've seen maybe big cannabis get involved early in other states. I know I hope I didn't answer the question for you, but are you seeing that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of small businesses see the potential for success here in cannabis. I think they see the state wanting everybody to be able to play a part in cannabis and be able to have a piece of the cannabis pie, so to speak. So I think there's more people kind of taking chances and taking risks. It's not easy. It's not an easy small business to have, but I think for the folks who especially have been waiting on the regulations and have been kind of waiting to do things according to the rules, I think they're going to start to see some payoff here now that we have the new regs.
And it seems like there's a lot of those folks, right? There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of folks who are doing what they're doing right now.
The gray space has also been growing.
Sure.
So, and that's going to be an interesting thing to see what happens. Like Tom mentioned about the enforcement, that's going to be really interesting because, we've seen the guinea pigs happen, but the gray space has also grown quite a bit, I think. And I think, as these, new permanent licenses start to be approved, I think enforcement is going to have to be right along with that. But we'll see what happens there.
And I think that's the plan from the OCM, from what I've heard, their enforcement
I was
division.
going to say, I think they need to hire people in enforcement first, right? Like the OCM slowly ramping up, right? Like OCM, the MRTA wasn't passed, and then all of a sudden OCM had 250 employees and a bunch of guys in blue coats with, yellow OCM like FBI jackets, right? Like I think I don't know if it was a legitimate video on Instagram, but I thought I saw somebody, on LinkedIn yesterday of it said OCM enforcement I don't know if it was a Halloween costume that somebody got at Party City, but that was actually something that happened, but it did look like there was a police presence and OCM enforcement staff in New York City. Again, can't speak to whether or not it actually happened because I wasn't there and I'm a lawyer and I have to qualify everything that I say. But, so I don't get sued for malpractice, but it looks like if that's actually happening, then it's bad news for gray market operators and good news for the soon to be licensed dispensaries and then everybody else in the supply chain who's selling to these guys. All right, I know we're at 4 and I said I'd take questions, but I don't think we can get through this presentation without talking about the Parasite case. Tom, you wanna
We'll make it quick.
go
For
after it?
anyone who doesn't know, there was a lawsuit filed by a Michigan-based company in New York State, federal court, New York State, seeking to, essentially alleging that the conditional adult use regulation, retail dispensary regulations were unconstitutional because this particular individual was justice involved, had a marijuana related offense in Michigan, and the regulations required that justice related marijuana offense to be in New York State. So it was, alleged it was discriminatory. The federal judge in New York did grant an injunction in the 5 regions that this particular company had applied for the retail license. And so when these conditional adult use retail licenses were given out on the 21st, these 5 regions, which are Finger Lakes, Western New York, Central New York, Mid Hudson, and Brooklyn, did not see any approved licenses. And OCM has been a little bit tight-lipped about what we can expect, but there was just last week before Thanksgiving, a motion filed by the state to whittle down this injunction, so to speak, to essentially it's an interesting insight into the application ranking process and the kind of like the the behind the scenes of how these applications were processed and scored. But what the motion essentially says is that if the injunction remains, that it should only be in the Finger Lakes region because that was the first ranked region for this particular applicant, and no other applicants outside got placed in a region outside of their first choice. So what it's essentially saying in a nutshell, because I was short on time, is that Central New York, Western New York, Mid Hudson, and Brooklyn should be opened back up, and those conditional retail dispensary applicants should be approved because this particular petitioner would not have received an application in those states anyways. So that's encouraging because OCM did state in the lead up or right after the meeting that they were planning on approving 4 Western New York conditional retail dispensaries, but were unfortunately prevented from doing so for the injunction. So hopefully, with the holidays coming up and the way courts work, I can't promise any timelines, but I think everyone in those regions in particular is hopeful that the state will be successful in that motion and open at least those 4 regions up to conditional retail sooner than later.
Katie, anything to add on Parasite?
Well, I think, Western New York, Western New Yorkers were kind of a little upset by that, right? So, there's been a lot of work put into this, a lot of risks taken, and then that was just kind of like the wind out of the sails, right? But, hopefully, as Tom said, it will be resolved soon. I think especially with Western New York cultivators, people in Western New York like to do business here. We like to have hyper local partnerships. They want to work with local dispensaries, local processors. And with this injunction, if they're not able to do that, that's going to be difficult for them. So hopefully, as Tom said, it will be resolved soon and those partnerships will continue. But I know they're not going to want to have to look to other regions of the state. They want to do business here locally and make those partnerships happen. So
Brian, impact of Parasite on No Wave or anything you want to add with respect to
Still 10 more zones for dispensaries. So 10 out of 10 are still available. I hate that my zone and Finger Lakes is going to be the one most affected, it looks like, by this. But at the end of the day,
maybe it'll stave off the medical ROs from putting their products on our shelves for a little bit. So if there is a silver lining, let's look at that as our silver lining, because at the end of the day, let's talk about reality. The biomass coming off these farms this year, I probably could work all of it in 16-hour shifts and 200 working days in my building. That means we're gonna run out of products on dispensary shelves. Guys, it's the reality of the situation. There's the insatiable market here. There's a reason why the gray market is so large here. There's a reason why every bodega has joints and tinctures and gummies on their shelves and can't keep them on their shelves because it's a $9 billion industry. And we are now just littering it with a couple 100,000 pounds of biomass. So just to keep in reality, it's a slow start. There'll be frustrations when dispensaries open. So dispensaries opening won't be the big bright light everybody's hoping for. But hopefully we ramp up and get ready for 2023, 2024, where it'll get stronger in the state. But that's the reality. Let's not get frustrated, dispensary owners or the processors or the growers. There's only so much biomass being grown this year that go into products.
All right. Anything else to add? Before we go into Q&A, Tom? Good.
No,
Katie?
good. See what the people are thinking.
Good. Brian?
I can't wait to put stuff on store shelves and everybody can smile in the state.
Questions from the physical audience? I've got 2 online. If anybody's shy, you're not gonna go into the. Let's go to Zoom. We'll let everybody. Question 1 from Joshua. Is it realistic? This is a really interesting question. Is it realistic to think that a small one-man craft cannabis, I believe that, my guess is grower, but I don't know if that's grower or if it relates to micro, can legally exist? Can a small grower be compliant and pay taxes? Brian, you're probably the person who's dealing the most with this small grower. I know we have,
This year, next year, 100%. This industry is going to change 3 years and next 3 times the next 3 years. So let's look at Michigan. That's probably your best example. So Michigan started about $300 a pound first year, like $500-600 a pound the second year, $30 to $40 a pound in the third year. Right. So when 900 growers come on board, that price is going to plummet down because a lot more people are going to biomass. So for the first 2 years is a different story than in 3 years. I would say you're always going to be able to manage small if you have good smokable, manageable smokable. That's going to be where best margins are as farmers. Like right now, we know internally, and all processors do, it actually was on our Slack chat, that we can't pay $1,500 a pound for smokable weed this year and make any profit at the dispensaries. And that's just because we don't want to turn around and add higher margins to the customers, which will create a pre-roll. Maybe that'll cost $50 to $60 for a 1 gram pre-roll, but you can buy an eighth for that. So just the reality of what's happening in this industry is something to keep in mind as well.
Well, I think, Tom, maybe you can talk about it, but it's my understanding that, the MRTA wants to prioritize craft growers like that. And while there will be ultimately market adjustments, it's my understanding, and based on the regs, I know you dove into them a lot deeper than I did. It's kind of, New York State cannabis is modeled off New York State craft beer and the alcohol industry at large. And we see a lot of craft brewers, so it should I think there should be some comfort for the craft grower as well. What are your
I
thoughts
think
on
this is just going back to kind of the spirit of New York State's legalization in promoting small business. And you look at the social equity fund that they've established, and I assume I'm looking forward to the advisory board meeting to find out a little bit more about that and what other opportunities there may be. They just rolled out a really interesting mentoring program for small growers like this to kind of get them a leg up and get started in the industry. So I think, and this be interesting to see if this is maybe reflected in some of the public comments to the regs too, but I think New York State's shown that, and OCM has shown that they're going to do everything they can for those small growers and for the small businesses to really keep them relevant as long as possible. But ultimately, there is an economic factor, and once licenses start to become transferable and things like that, I do have some concerns long-term, as Brian mentioned, based on what we've seen in other states. But New York has seen what's happened in other states, and I think is reacting or trying to be proactive at this point in keeping those smaller guys that are doing it right relevant and in the game.
And I think New York consumers are gonna reward good smokable quality bud grown in New York State, whether it's outdoor or indoor. And to me as a consumer, I'm gonna be very easy on these growers because they had to grow outdoors. They couldn't have a lot of conditions. So the best, if I find some good bud out there this year, I'm telling you what, I'm probably gonna be loyal to those farms for the next 2-3 years, because if they grew it well outdoors, they're probably gonna do super well indoors. So I'm definitely gonna take what I see out here. And then I'm gonna see who trimmed it well and who did it. Maybe their percentage wasn't as good, but they knew how to handle the flower. I'm gonna put that farm up high too, right? So you can't control the fact that you don't have 12-hour light as long as we need to for these farms, right? The fact that the August, September weather didn't help them to keep their plants up as long as they could have to get the full value out of these plants. So now how do they handle it? Because obviously we're not gonna get the yield on percentage that we wanted to with outdoor grows, but we will get good quality. I've smoked some good quality strains already from around the state. I'm excited to see what the general public's gonna say about it.
Katie, anything on the small craft grower?
Well, kind of to Brian's point, you know, there's a customer loyalty aspect there too. And I think it's gonna depend on where the region is, but you know, just speaking on Western New York specifically, we have a lot of customer loyalty in a lot of different segments, right? Like craft beer and, you know, pizza and wings, you know, like we're once we find what we like, that's where we want to go. So I think there is a lot of room for craft growers in depending on what regions they're in.
Sure. Yeah, I think that loyalty piece, Katie, I mean, Katie and I talked about that quite a bit over the past year, and you know, for better or worse, it's kind of the creed of Western New York. So, Miss, please. Thank you, Lolly, everybody.
Hello, friends. So I'm looking at, when we're talking about craft growers, I'm also thinking about craft brands. I'm thinking about brands, we won't use the C brand because that's a whole other
That's the
20-minute conversation. But let's just hypothetically say we have a brand that we really like in California that really wants to partner with a processor such as No Wave. How could they possibly do that? Is there a way of in the regs, and I have not read them, so kudos on me if it's
No,
in
you're
there.
good. It's a
And
good question. No.
but I want to launch a brand, but I also have relationships with brands that are out of state that really are amazing. I'm a medical patient first, but at the end of the day, it's all medicinal in some factor. And so having a craft brand and with unique delivery systems, such as Wana Brands, fast acting, that's a great product line for me. And to do a co-brand with Nikki and the Plant and Wana Brands through No Wave, is that a way of bringing a brand to market? Even though there's outside influence, but they're like a known brand, but they fall under me
So
and you.
I'm gonna default to Tom a little bit on this, but I will tell you just functionally, if you come to me, and then I'll have him go over the TPI piece. Fair?
Yeah.
So essentially, us at No Wave, our number one choice is we want to build our brands.
Right,
Number two, we want to build New York State brands.
Right.
Number three, then we'll talk to out of state brands, because we want to be loyal to New York. So I'll put that out there first off. So we're always going to default to New York State brands. So if you're a New York State resident, you want to build a brand here, you got to be careful with what you call your affiliations,
yes,
right? Because of TPI, true party of interest, and where that money comes from and how that divulged. And I'll default to Tom on this.
Yeah, no, like I said, there's an extensive list of, you know, there's at least, it's almost like a maze, but you can navigate it to do this. And the way I envision it happening is that it would still all be New York State, you know, because it has to be New York State seed to sale,
right,
but it would almost be more of a licensing agreement.
like
You know,
name, image and likeness.
Exactly, like
type of-
intellectual, licensing
Licensing
intellectual
agreement.
property.
So you're going to have
They
to,
could get this, you
Yeah.
know, they could advise you on the genetics, they could help with the growing process, is it that, but
Formulation.
But it is very, as you know, Brian mentioned, I mentioned before, it is very technical, and it's something that you have to be cognizant of to not trip up that true party of interest.
Yeah, but
Steps, yeah,
doesn't the TPI
these MSOs out of state, so Colorado or Michigan, they can take the seed and bring it over. I'm just gonna use you as an example. because you're on the panel. They can bring the seed over. That's not a problem.
Well,
And
for
then-
this year.
Right, for this
For the
year,
next year,
but then all of a sudden they can go and start having that grow and she can have her brand in that concept. It doesn't change the TPI concept because it's just the seed. Now they're growing on behalf of Nikki.
But
Who has
that's
the-
all I'm saying is it depends on how that financial relationship
Exchange
exists.
of goods, you're exchanging services no matter what,
Sure.
right? So the state is declaring that we have to sign up all of our brands for two parties of interest because they're trying to keep a two-tiered system.
Mhm.
They don't want, for instance, let's say she's affiliated with Cookies.
Mhm.
And Cookies wants to start a dispensary in New York City.
Yeah,
They
course.
can now not have any interest in her brand. Zero money interest, anything,
Gotcha.
right? So this is where we have to, there's a two-tier system based on, it's based on the liquor laws of New York State. That's what they're basing this legislation on. Make sense?
Yeah.
So you can't have a Cookies brand and a Cookies dispensary.
I
You
get
can't-
that part.
yeah.
I get that part, but I'm just trying to,
So you just gotta
Get
figure out how
Nikki in
you
the
say the
plan.
word affiliation. That's what you,
Affiliation.
that affiliation word, is that financial or is that just advice? Because that matters for TPI.
The other thing that I want to add, and I also, out of respect for everybody's time online, thanks for everybody hanging in with us, thanks for everybody out in the audience. I'm just looking at the cheese tray over there and I know that we could dive into
Sorry.
this, like, no, this is good. And I think this is a point
Great
that,
question.
you know, someone
Everybody's
like
asking that
Nikki Lawley or a Nikki Lawley-esque person could consider. You don't need a license to operate in the New York State cannabis industry. If you have a strong brand, there's ways to do what I think you want to do based on, you know, what I'm hearing right now. That doesn't require you to go through the state and do it, right? There's a number of brands that I know on the West Coast that are West Coast specific who contract, they do co-packing agreements.
Right.
All of it's done. So specifically with respect to the packaging and labeling requirements. If it's a No Wave brand or a non-No Wave brand, it says on the package produced at No Wave in Rochester, New York, right?
And you want to
So
hear
if
an
you-
interesting caveat to that? If you're marketing and you have an influencer that has majority of people under 21, we get a gig our license for that.
Mhm.
This is why you're a TPI. Because if you are using an influencer with your Nikki in the plant, right? So you have someone in Colorado that the majority of their people on their Instagram account are under 21, that's a gig on us marketing.
no, I'm.
You see what I'm
my-
saying,
my-
but
But my
this is
whole
why
life
true
is
party of
over
it-
40.
No, but what I'm saying is this is why the true party of interest piece is in there.
I don't have any.
To protect
influence.
against all this, because essentially the processor is on the hook for the
Okay.
marketing of the company that you're making the brand for.
Okay,
Make sense?
yes, it does. Thank
Okay.
you. Sorry.
No, you're great, because these are valid questions that every single person asks us when they call us. So this is huge,
Yeah, that's very down the rabbit hole.
a little bit, but yeah.
It is, it's pretty, it's deep, but it's, you know, there's gonna be a lot of evolution in the next, you know. There's gonna be evolution in the next month, let alone the next. Let me come right back to that. Cool. Yeah, just in terms of, we'll see, we're gonna see what happens, because you know, like we joke around about, we got regs and they're gonna change in 60 days, right?
That's
And
right.
and you can affect those regs immediately. And OCM, Cannabis Control Board put it in their slides last time. We want to hear from you. Tell us what we got wrong. If this is something that you think that, whatever, if it's licensed, non-licensed activity, speak up now, right? Because it's the best way to affect the market, especially if you have a brand, if you have a presence in the market, they're listening. They're even talking to us sometimes, which is kind of wild.
It's crazy.
T-Shop for the last one.
Maybe won't go down the rabbit hole, but 36 rec licenses approved last week.
Yes.
Next steps, what could you expect from those guys in the next 6-12 months? Doors open or what? Any idea?
We're hoping. We were talking about today that, and Brian might actually have a little more inside info on the status of the, retail dispensary locations. But I think 6 months is a fair estimate, Brian, unless you disagree.
The OCM has
less.
been pushing on their Instagram account to have products out to market by the end of the year. Do you think they're not gonna fulfill that? And they just kind of built into the what they can do into this conditional licenses. Guys, they don't need to have a physical brick and mortar store that we walk into. They can do delivery and drive up windows. Okay, so for instance, my company, we did a 2-part build on our site, a C of O for the back of the house. A week later, we got the C of O for our front offices because we were waiting on some things up front. The minute we got our C of O for the back, I could start extracting. It's no different than a retail building.
So the minute someone gets the back of their house situated and gets that CFO on the back of the house, which towns are willing to do, you're gonna see delivery or drive-up operations out of that building.
So you might not have Apple Store cannabis, but you might have McDonald's drive-through cannabis.
Okay, so that's reality, because there, there's no way, guys, the state's gonna make themselves look like. And the new testing that came out last week matches this, because did anybody know how we're changing our testing? We are no longer testing by lot or batch for the first couple months. We are now doing line testing. Okay, changes things significantly, and I'm gonna put a warning out there for processors that are still in line. Do not change your GMP protocols to match the state protocols. You will face your you will fail your GMP audit. Please, everybody and everywhere, listen to this. You still have to do all of your protocols of batches and lots. They're just saying that for third-party testing, they're reducing the amount of tests going to them. And if I produce the same kind of gummy for a full week on my line, even if it's 10 different kind of distillates, I can put that all together as one lot and send a couple samples up, and that'll be going to sale for dispensaries. That will save us all processors between $50,000 and $100,000 this year alone. And it will save in time 2 to 3 weeks for all these test guys, because labs are not faster than 2 to 3 week turnaround times right now. They're getting there. I was just at one today in Buffalo. They're close, but they're not quite there yet. Yep, they got great turnaround times, but they don't have all the equipment on site. So we have trade-offs, but sorry, I could go all day. He's
I
right.
could listen to you all day. This is great.
Great stuff.
I'm gonna kill it. If anybody online wants to get in touch with us, I think you all, if they have our emails just based on
Yeah,
that, find us on, Tom Hughes, Ryan Stearns, Joe Schaefer, send us an email. We'd love to talk to you. If there's any additional follow-up questions, send us an email. We'll figure it out. Beyond that, say it again.
We're gonna send a follow-up.
Yes, we will have a follow-up email with contact information. And we will also have this video reposted. So if you want to hear my bad jokes or any of the nuggets that you heard from any of our panelists today, check it out. And beyond that, thanks everybody for coming. Thanks for being online, and see you in 2023.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Rock stars.
I'm blown away. It's like there's so many things I feel like I could get out of him right now.
So.
When we just. I mean. Sales roles. Yes, so. A couple of others here, right?
So.